So I want to go on a short rant here. Um, I want to talk about my Steelers as well as a team I hate, the Dallas Cowboys, but they're a little bit similar, and here's why. Both of those teams historically are pretty conservative organizations. Both teams, they like to hang on to their coaches. Uh, Obviously, Dallas for a while was a more aggressive organization in Jerry Jones's earlier years as an owner, but nowadays they really don't make any big trades or any big moves. They've had opportunities when players have gotten cut in season or potentially on the trade block in season, maybe a championship caliber move, and they decided not to go for it. In the case of the Steelers, kind of like Dallas, they're in a position where the standard used to be, compete for Super Bowl titles every single year. And now the standard appears to be let's just be above average and have a winning record and just try to sneak in the playoffs. And I think in the case of Dallas, it's just Jerry Jones. Uh, the Cowboys are a brand. They're entertainment. They're not just a football team. They're more than a football team. So he needs them to be a competitive team. He can't really blow it up or take a chance on moving off a Dak to a younger quarterback. And maybe that guy, takes off like we've seen with C.J. Stroud and other rookie quarterbacks. Maybe he struggles a little bit and it sets the team back a year or two. But neither one of those teams appears to really be going for it right now. And on this AFC NFC championship Sunday, conference championship weekend, I look at a team to really the two teams, honestly, they're playing in the AFC title game, Baltimore and Kansas City. If you look at Kansas City, historically, they've been a pretty conservative organization in that for years and years and years, they would go out and they would just trade for or sign uh, kind of middle of the road veteran quarterbacks. Remember, they had drafted Todd Blackledge in 1983, one of many teams, including the Steelers. Unfortunately, that drafted uh, a quarterback other than Dan Marino. But, you know, uh, Kansas City, the reason I point that out is because after 1983, they didn't take a quarterback in the first round again until, guess who? Patrick Mahomes in 2017. Now, Kansas City, I mentioned, they'd kind of went conservative with all these veteran quarterbacks they had over the years. Remember when they signed Andy Reid in 2013, he went out and he traded for Alex Smith. And Alex Smith had a really good run for 5 years in Kansas City, made a few Pro Bowls. They made the playoffs all but 1 year. But they knew in Kansas City that he wasn't going to help them break through and, win a Super Bowl or even get to a Super Bowl, really. So what did the Chiefs do? So 2017, they're drafting 27th, and there's some uncertainty in that draft. Is Mitch Trubisky going to be really good in the NFL? Is Deshaun Watson going to translate from being a great college quarterback to being a great NFL quarterback? Patrick Mahomes, what is he? Because he's a little bit of a project. He's a little bit boom or bust. Probably not quite as boom or bust as obviously Josh Allen was, but still some questions there. But what does Kansas City do? Drafting 27th, and they trade all the way up to 10th. Usually not what a conservative organization does. Trade all the way up to 10th while they still have Alex Smith. Draft Patrick Mahomes. 2017 is essentially like a redshirt year, his rookie year. Alex Smith has another really strong year. They get to the playoffs. I think Alex Smith made the Pro Bowl again that year as well. But then after that year, they traded him away. They went with Mahomes in 2018, and the rest is history. And, you look at Baltimore, they're a team that, being rivals with the Steelers, they kind of patterned themselves after Pittsburgh a little bit. And, it's interesting because they win a Super Bowl with Flacco in 2012. He was lights out. They give him a big extension. And I believe they got back to the AFC title game again after that. Or maybe they lost in the divisional round. I don't know if they made it back to the AFC, but they made it back to the playoffs a couple more times after that. But they started to fall off. They started missing the playoffs. Flacco started to wane in his performances. And then all of a sudden, 2018 comes around. All these teams are passing on Lamar Jackson. They're not really sure what to think of him in the NFL. You need an organization that's really going to build around him and really fully commit to him and not try to make him fit their system. So they draft him with the final pick of the first round. Remember, they passed on him a couple times actually in that first round. And they finally drafted him at the end of the first round. And ultimately, mid-season-ish, maybe slightly before the middle of that season, they end up inserting him into the starting lineup. Turns Baltimore's season around and turns the course of their franchise around. So, those are two organizations that really historically have kind of played it conservative, and they got aggressive with their quarterback situations. So what does this have to do with Pittsburgh and Dallas? Well, I mentioned Dak. Feels like Dallas, I know, their cap situation and the cap hit if they try to trade him or whatever isn't very good. It's a very high cap hit. But I'll tell you right now, mark my words, Dallas will never win a Super Bowl with Dak. They won't win a Super Bowl with Mike McCarthy either, just like they weren't going to win a Super Bowl with Jason Garrett. But especially a quarterback, Dak's a very, very good quarterback. He's one of the finalists for MVP, but he just doesn't get done in the playoffs. And really, his playoff numbers don't do him justice of how kind of below average he's been, because he's had a few playoff games where he's been able to pad his stats in garbage time, i.e. this wild card loss to the Packers didn't play as well as the final stat line. He's been pretty bad in the playoffs. Dallas just isn't going anywhere with Dak Prescott. So Dallas, they need to figure out, do they really want to win a championship? Mainly, does Jerry Jones really want to win a championship at this point? He's 80, 81, whatever he is now. Doesn't feel like it. Feels like he's content with just being good enough. And my Steelers especially should have gotten rid of Tomlin 5 years ago. They haven't, unfortunately. They just want to be good enough. They should have really kind of forced Ben Roethlisberger's hand, kind of forced him out a couple years earlier. They didn't. So what happens? He finally retires after 2021. Well, 2022 is one of the worst quarterback draft classes ever. The worst since 2013. That was the draft that you had E.J. Manuel and all those guys. Although Geno Smith was in that draft, and he's playing better, but still, yeah. So anyways, what do? They do something that only the dysfunctional organizations do. Something that I've seen the Browns do over and over again, make an emotional pick. Make something that wins the headlines. You don't win Super Bowls in April and May. Steelers, what do? They go out and they draft Kenny Pickett, who, they saw him at Pitt for the previous 5 years. He wasn't any good until his senior year. Now, part of that's because I think personally Pat Narduzzi sucks as a coach. And his coordinators weren't very good because they just had no innovation. Anyways, the point is, you look 2 years into his NFL career, Kenny Pickett, who really didn't have very high upside going into that NFL draft, the Steelers picked him because, he's a Pitt Panther, and we passed on the previous Pitt Panther great quarterback, Dan Marino. Dan Marino had all the talent in the world. Kenny Pickett has middling talent at best. So now it's like you're going to possibly bring back Mason Rudolph, who played well at the end of the year. But will he replicate that next year? Who's the new offensive coordinator going to be in Pittsburgh? What if you don't get Rudolph back? Then you're going to sign probably a pretty mediocre veteran quarterback. And so you're going to be stuck with Kenny Pickett. So it feels like teams like Pittsburgh and Dallas, they don't really want to win a championship bad enough. They're fine with just being good enough, because you look at teams like Kansas City, you look at teams like Baltimore, pretty conservative like the Pittsburgh and Dallas, but yet when they had to be aggressive with young quarterbacks, another good example, conservative organization, Packers, they didn't have to draft Aaron Rodgers when they did. Didn't have to draft Jordan Love when they did. Well, look what, they're hitting home runs left and right. So you have to take that chance if you're Dallas. You have to take that chance if you're Pittsburgh. Neither one seems to care. Neither team's going anywhere. End rant.